Hi everybody, Cheryl and Lady coming to you from the Ladies Garden and Home, and today we're going to talk about seedling care, so I hope you join us. I started a lot of my seedlings much earlier than I have in previous years. I did that because I wanted to dedicate the space to them and allow them a chance to establish as pretty good-sized seedlings before I transplant them out for a couple of reasons. One is I think that I could have gotten more harvest out of a lot of them if I had just started them earlier. And the other reason is because I have rabbits, and in the past I've had a groundhog. I found out last night I have an opossum, which I think only eats bugs, so that's a good thing. But I have animals that come and eat the heads off of a lot of my seedlings. This happened with my tomatoes, this happened with my peas, and I've had to replant and replant. So this year, I'm determined to get them a little bit stronger before I put them out in the garden. That said, I thought it would also be good timing for people who are starting their seeds at a normal time for them, to show you where they are in their progression, what you can expect, and hopefully I can impart some tips that I've learned along the way. So you can see the seedlings are in different stages of development. This flat was planted January 28th. This flat was also planted the same day. And this flat was planted January 29th. Then I have in here fava beans that I just started 3 days ago. And in here are my pansies. So for the majority of my seeds, I start them on this glass tea cart that's up against the south-facing sliding glass doors. And this time of day, as you can see, the sun starts getting a little bit dappled as it heads to the west. But the most important thing when you are starting seeds indoors without grow lights is, and I do it at least twice a day, sometimes it's more than that, like this celery here, what happens is they'll start stretching to the light. So what I do is I just simply turn the tray when I see them start to stretch. Now, all in all, these have been doing pretty well without too much stretching. And I think it's because I took some advice from a YouTube gardener named Jenna. Her show is called Growfully with Jenna. I love watching her. She's such an expert. But here's what she suggested to do. Her idea is to take tin foil or aluminum foil, whatever you want to call it, and just prop it up on the opposite side of the window for it to reflect light back. And I have to say that this has really helped. I notice I don't have to turn. Like I said, I turn at least twice a day, sometimes more. Generally, whenever I catch the fact that they might be stretching, I just go ahead and, to be on the safe side, just turn them. So here are the peppers. Some of them have sprouted, some of them have not. Some of them just take a little bit longer than the others do. It's perfect for my purposes because I don't need to start a lot of things on a heat mat except for the eggplant, the peppers, cucumbers I'll start on it, tomatoes, the heat-loving plants I will put on the heat mat. But I wanted to talk about lighting. This is a little hack that I got off of Amazon, and as you can see, it's a clamp with these flexible bars that come out, and then the lighting is here, and you can time it. It has a timer, which I didn't realize, so I bought a different timer. But anyway, I've been using this timer. Got a timer, you can set it up to 12 hours. I like leaving them on at least 14, 15 hours a day. I turn them on when I come down in the morning, and then before I go up to bed at night, I put them on for another 3 hours. So that usually gets me between the 14 and 15 hour range. But I wanted to show you how important it is to keep the lights close enough, 2 to 3, like 2 inches from the top, because this one I did not have that. I had it too far up, and you see how this one is starting to stretch? This one is stretching. And I think the reason is because the way that these were situated, I did not have them, 2 inches above, and it started to stretch towards the light. So what I've been doing to kind of combat that is I have been raising them a little bit every time they grow. I've got the shorter ones here on this side, and I have the taller ones on this side. So I can just move them up and down as they grow. My preferred method of watering is bottom feeding. However, when they're in this such a young state, that's not really necessary yet. Instead, I'll show you what I do. I gently spray them just to keep the soil moist. Their roots really haven't started digging down yet, but I don't want the top to dry out yet. Now sometimes when they flop over, what you can do is try to straighten it up just by moving soil around it and propping it back up. If the root hasn't died, it should be okay. If the root has died, you'll know pretty quickly that it's not viable. Like, for example, this one here, no amount of propping up is probably going to help this little guy. I don't know. Let's stick him in there and see if it gets any better. Don't know if he's going to make it, but let's try propping him up. See if he makes it. Got to do that pretty gently though. An important part of seedling care is knowing when to water and how much to water. And this is why I like bottom feeding my seedlings once they get to the point where spritzing them is not going to keep them moist enough. And I'll tell you, these guys that are on this side that are smaller, I can continue spritzing them. But this tray in particular, even though these guys aren't very big, as you can see, and I'll just show you a comparison, how much lighter the soil is in this tray than in this tray. So this means that it's time for me to start bottom watering this. So the way I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do this little tray separately in here, I'm just going to fill this up maybe about 2/3 of the way. And when all the water is absorbed, this will be the same color as that. Once that's done, just remove it from the tray and dump the rest of the water. Now, if all of these needed bottom watering, I would just put the water directly in here. And then we're going to let this steep in here until either all of the water has been absorbed. It might need more if this isn't turned a darker, moist color. And you can feel it when it starts getting moist. Or it's already saturated, in which case I'm going to remove it and dump the rest of the water. On such an unusually warm day in February, I decided to put the onions and the leeks out. Also, I had the broccoli and the leafy greens flats out here earlier, but I only left them out about an hour. It was very, very windy, and I also don't want them to get sun scald, but as you can see, these are kind of in the dappled shade, and the wind today I think is really going to help strengthen their stems. But that's not something that you want to do very often in the winter. It's just a very unusually warm day today. It got up to 58, I think. That's Fahrenheit. If the weather is not as pleasant as it was today, which, like I said, is very rare for February here in Connecticut, Zone 7, the best thing to do is put a fan on your seedlings, and that fan motion will mimic the wind. I don't have the electricity availability on this because of the sliding glass door on this wall. So instead what I do, and this works too, is just gently rub my hands over the seedlings to help give their stems some strength. You do it very gently, and this also really mimics the wind. I use these plastic bags as humidity domes, and it really does help keep the soil nice and moist. And even probably a week or two after I take them out of these bags, the soil is still moist enough that I don't need to water for a while. Once the seedlings emerge, it is important to get them out of their plastic wrapper. And as you can see from these trays, I did not do that quick enough. For example, this little guy here had already flopped over. I'm going to pull that out, but after this gets a little bit bigger, because this is why we do 2 seeds in a cell, because if one dies or one doesn't come up, you've got another one behind it. Sometimes I do 3 in a cell. I still have plastic over some of the seedlings that have not germinated at all. Not all of them, because I'm trying to keep them moist by misting them. But once those seedlings emerge, you don't want them to dampen off, which is basically when they have so much water, they become waterlogged and they just flop over. Now, the other thing that's important to keep an eye out for is when your seedlings start growing in their adult leaves. Their true leaves, they're called. They're the leaves that are the recognizable part of the plant. But as you can see right here, these are still the baby leaves, or the cotyledons they're called. But once their true leaves come in and the cotyledons are starting to yellow, what that means, it's time to start fertilizing them. Now I use this general purpose organic liquid fertilizer, but I had this smaller bottle last year, and this actually lasted me, I still have some in it, all year long. And I use it for my seedlings. I also use it when I water the container plants, but not always. You don't need to do it all the time, but things in containers and your seedlings, you need to give them the nutrition that they are not going to get in their little tiny cell. And they have different care for adult plants and different care for seedling plants. 2 ounces of fertilizer concentrate with 1 gallon of water, and apply to the soil every week. Now, I don't apply to the soil every week. I apply it to the soil once their adult leaves have come in, every time I water them. Now, that's not going to be exactly once a week. It really depends on what your soil looks like, because you don't want your soil completely drying out, and by the time that they're big enough that they're requiring that much water, they're probably requiring that much fertilizer. And this is organic. This is made out of It's derived from corn steep liquor and fermented fish byproducts. So I'm warning you right now, the house might not smell too good when you're doing it, but it does dissipate pretty quickly. So this has a 3:3:2 ratio. 3, the first number being nitrogen, 3% the second being phosphate, and 2% the third being that would be potassium, potash, okay? So this is a balanced formula, and I think that it's done very well for my plants. Another issue you might come up against is fungus starting to develop on the top of your soil. And in general, that doesn't bother me as long as there's not fungus gnats. Now, I do a couple of things. I had a horrible infestation one year, and I do a couple of things to help prevent a fungus gnat problem. One is I sterilize my soil, meaning I pour boiling water in it before I start using it for seed starting. And the other thing I do is after I've planted seed, I put some cinnamon. I have some Ceylon cinnamon here. I just sprinkle that on the top. The fungus gnats don't like that cinnamon. I've seen them actually jump off of plants that I've done that to and then jump onto something that does. But there is a fungus that you can start developing. It's not necessarily bad for the plant, but it is an invitation. So what I do when I've had a really bad problem, so far these aren't too bad, is I take a little implement like this fork, and I just take that layer of soil with the fungus on it off. It's tricky though because you don't want to disturb the plants. So unless you've got that issue where there's a lot of it, you feel that it's starting to affect the health of your plants, or you have fungus gnats, I would kind of leave it alone. And if you do happen to get an infestation of fungus gnats, there is a fix that actually worked very, very nicely for me, and that is I mixed 1/3 of a cup of hydrogen peroxide, as long as it's 3%, with 2 cups of water, and I watered it from the bottom, and I let the water wick up and it started to bubble, and those gnats were done. Now, I had such a problem, and I'm sure it came in with a potting mix that I used that had a peat component to it. Peat apparently has a horrific reputation of bringing in fungus gnats. I mean, if you think about where peat grows, right, it's in a swaggy bog of water. So one of the things that I think has led me not to have fungus gnat problems anymore is the fact that instead of peat, I use coconut coir as part of my seed medium. And I'm going to link for you a video below on how I make my potting mix when I'm starting seeds. And I think the recipe has been very successful. So take a look at that when we're done. Fungus or algae, which you can tell the difference because the algae is a little green. All of those are kind of common problems. Like I said, don't bother removing it if it's not really affecting your plants. But I wanted to show you something that looks like it's fungus, but what that really is, this white stuff here, what this really is a sign that a seed is about to sprout. That doesn't happen all the time. It sometimes happens. But if you were to go to remove that, you're really going to be interrupting the germination process. I don't know what it's called. I am kind of curious, and I'll look it up. but it's just kind of a phenomenon that I've noticed over the years, that when something's about to sprout, that's like a sure tell sign. Here's another issue you'll see sometimes with seedlings, and that's when their little seed cap gets stuck on their leaves, and eventually it will deteriorate off. But to help out the seedling, the best thing you can do is just take a little spit, there's a chemical in our saliva that just helps dissolve it. When they're this young though, I don't really bother doing that yet because it might just fall off on its own. Now, as you can see, these onions are starting to flop over. I'm not too worried about that because I think they're nice and strong. And that's just kind of how onions are. But when they get just a little bit taller, I'm going to trim them to about 2 inches high. And I'll do this a couple of times before I plant them. It just helps them from getting intertangled with each other and puts more effort into the roots. I've done a couple of videos already on how to sow seeds, so I'm going to link those at the bottom. I have one on tomatoes, I have one on peppers and eggplant, and I have another one on onions and leeks. So I think that would help out if you haven't sowed your seeds yet. And just a word of note, in case you do have some failures, like I'm not very happy with how that fennel is looking over there and the cilantro. If something fails, you don't get something to germinate at all, well, you've got a choice. Either you start over or you redo your plan. But that's kind of what the gardening journey is all about. Well, that's it. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you picked up some tips that you can use when you're starting seeds this year. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and I hope you subscribe, especially since I'm going to be coming out with some what I think are very exciting videos in the very near future. So hit that alert bell, and from the Ladies Garden and Home, enjoy your gardening journey. Bye. Say goodbye, lady. Say goodbye, lady. Lady says goodbye.